Samyukta, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great. How are you?
Doing good, doing good. I was looking through some of the work you did and I was fascinated by it because I looked at it seemed that service is a big theme in some of the work you do. You're working a lot with underprivileged students around the globe, helping to provide education to kids everywhere. I saw you did some work on your own for tutoring, and then you also working on this other project with your blog. So I was really fascinated by the work you do, and I really want to dive into some of the motivations behind that work and lessons you've learned along the way. But one thing in particular I saw that was really interesting to me was that you've been researching brain development. And
Yeah.
I found that interesting because me personally, I'm really fascinated by neuroscience because I think there's so little that we really know about how our brain works. And I think it's sometimes that's such fascinating things that sometimes hard for us to explain. And I think neuroscience has been growing in the field over the last 10 years. And I'm really excited when I meet people who are in that field, this growing field over here. So how about we start over there? Tell me a little bit about some of the lessons you learned, and basically, how about you first define like what in particular you're researching? From what I read, it was mainly about child brain development. So how about you give an overview about your research in brain development to start?
Yeah, totally. So actually, I'll tell you how I got into neuroscience because for the longest time, I kept telling people like, I'm gonna go into finance. I'm gonna major in finance. I'm gonna be like a finance bro, okay? But the thing is, I was just never really passionate about that. But one thing I was really, really passionate about was education. And I already had established the poetry program. And I really cared about helping kids in particular, right? And I've never been a super like STEM nerd type person, but I wanted to get into research because I saw that was a thing that a lot of people did in high school, but I didn't want to just research something I didn't really care about. And that's how I met Dr. Nan. And Dr. Nan, God, like like I always say, like the God, the universe, like she literally came down from like the heavens to me because I was emailing a lot of professors who were like based in neuroscience, and it just something wasn't clicking. Their research was not stuff I cared about. And then I was talking to her, and she was saying, "Hey, you should look into executive functions in kids." And if you don't know what executive functions are, they're basically like skills that people have and they develop as you get older. It's stuff like attention and like focus. And the three main executive functions that any like research paper you read on executive function skills, these are the three that you'll always see. It's working memory, cognitive flexibility, and inhibition. And from those, there are so many, but those are the main three. And I'm studying how those develop in kids as they get older and how things like mental disorders like ADHD, anxiety, depression, there's so many, but we're focusing on ADHD and how that might be correlated with child classroom performance. And what I think is so interesting about that is in the education space, a lot of kids are labeled as lazy, or they're saying like they don't work hard, or you're just bad at school. But there's so much more behind that. And that's what I really, really wanted to get into because me, like I've always been a very like driven person and I love like, focusing on my academics, but I see other people struggling. I'm like, a lot of teachers just blame them and then that kid like lacks a lot of confidence. They feel like they're just bad at what they're doing, but really they just might need some more guidance and help in what they're doing.
Yeah, and I guess it doesn't help when the school system is all structured in a very like central way where they're testing you and like on one
Absolutely.
particular skill set. So I want to get into like what your perspective is on the current education system, at least in the West. But I do want to talk about Miss Nan as well, real quick, because I think that everyone I talk to says the same thing about her. I
Yeah.
know that you were just with her on Saturday, right? I think my sister
Yeah.
that she saw you as well because
Yeah.
she took the whole class of 2024 out to the farm, and then
Yeah.
yesterday she randomly texted all of the class of 2020 and brought us all together. So it's really good that she has that energy and she brings everyone together like that. So it's good to have her in her life. Um, yeah, when you talk about you originally were going all like the finance bro pathway, and I've talked to a lot of guys like that, and a lot of them are pretty honest about it that they don't really know what they want to do, but this is like a good option, so they'll go down
Yeah.
that path. I was actually talking to my friend yesterday about it. Like he's still like experimenting with what he wants to do. Like maybe he wants to get into business, but he said at least for now, like that's what he'll do. But hopefully in the future he can divert into a direction where he's more passionate about what he does. But yeah, I think it takes a lot of skill to be able to break the shackles of just wanting to take the most popular path and just focusing on maybe what would make the most money or what might have the most promising future and really going into what you're interested by. And I think that whenever I do meet people that are just passionate about what they do, I can always tell that I think work in general, when people who are really find some sense of fulfillment in life, it's always through work, I feel like. And it's
Yeah.
usually when they find a work that they really enjoy doing. So, how were you able to figure out that first of all that this was something you're interested by and then come down this path, especially when you mentioned that in the past you were really going down this other pathway of finance. So how were you able to make that transition and deciding that now I want to go and do neuroscience?
So honestly, my relationship with the STEM fields is something that I think a lot of like South Asian kids can relate to. It's always like you have to be a doctor or not even like a doctor, like a lawyer, which is not really STEM, but you have to do something STEM related a lot of times. And that especially so I go to schools in Edison, right? I go to Edison High School. And when I was in eighth grade was like a huge turning point for me. I applied to STEM academies. And that's a whole thing that I could talk about. I could riff about that for like days. So I applied to two STEM academies. I applied to Edison Magnet School, which it's an incredibly difficult school to get into. Like for my middle school, there was only one kid who actually got in. And then there's Edison. So I go to Edison High School, but there's a cohort of 24 students that they take, which is a STEM academy, right? And they focus on like engineering and stuff like that. And I just remember applying to these schools solely just to get in, not because I cared about what I was going to study there. I just did it for like, like the status quo is like, oh, like this is nice. Like I'm that STEM kid. And I applied. And the first academy, like the first at the Edison Magnet School I applied to, the testing was like totally screwed up for me. I took like the first test and then I got off the Zoom and they were like, you can't take the next test. And they were like, you can take it now. But then I didn't get into that one. And then Edison High STEM Academy, all of my teachers thought I was going to get in. And like, I'm not saying that to brag. It was just like a thing. Like they thought like, oh, like you'd probably get in. And I didn't even know if I was going to get in, but I at least wanted an interview. Didn't get the interview, didn't get into the program, and I was like devastated. And I promised, like I swore off of STEM. I was like, I'm never gonna go into the STEM field ever again after this. Like STEM hates me. And then I was just so sad. And I remember literally writing in my application to the STEM academy, I was like, I don't want to pursue STEM. I really just want to pursue a business path. But hey, let me in anyway. Like, why would I apply if that was my thing, right? So after doing all of that, I just remember being like, you know what? Like I wasn't meant to get in. Like if I was meant to get in, I would have, right? And that's my thing. Like everything happens for a reason. And I felt like I was kind of left out of the loop. Like I felt like, all these kids in STEM Academy or all these kids like in all these like very high prestigious universities and schools, they all had some sort of background in research or they all had some sort of like very great like STEM based internship. And I was like, I'm not into STEM. So I was like, what am I really into? And I'm very, very passionate about education and the arts. So I've written and I've been writing for years, like ever since I was in elementary school. So I started the poetry program. And after I started the poetry program, I was like, hey, how can I incorporate research into this? How can I use research to back up my work? So I was like, I'm working with such young kids, and not every kid in the education system is served properly, and there aren't enough resources and there isn't enough research to back up like, hey, this is what they need or whatever. Like there just isn't enough research because it's such a developing field and it's something that people have only started to kind of believe in and work in for the past few decades. And I really wanted to get into that because I wanted to help kids kind of be able to recognize their potential and their futures, even if it's not just by following one path, because not everyone follows that one path. And that's how I got into neuroscience.
Yeah, that's really interesting. So it's basically you had this negative relationship with getting into STEM, and then that fueled your interest in helping other kids like find out like what they're passionate about, and neuroscience kind of fuels that. So it's a tool that you use to help understand like why do some kids struggle in certain areas and how you can help them to achieve and maybe find their own interest and find more success with the education system that might be geared towards supporting only like one type of individual who works in like one type of way.
Absolutely.
Amazing. So, how about you break down like what when you look at the education system in the West, with your research in neuroscience and understanding how memory works and how child development works, do you see any problems in the way the Western education system is designed?
So I'm taking the SAT in August, and I personally just think the way the education system is designed is it's rooted towards the one goal of creating a perfect child, and that perfect child doesn't exist. And every single person in the education system in the West, they're working towards something that is solely rewarded by academic validation, and kids become so focused on getting into their top university. Like even me, like my friends, we always talk about like, hey, like we don't want to go to this school, we don't want to stay in state, we want to go to the Ivies, or we want to go to Stanford, we want to, that's the goal, and people don't focus on education itself, and that's the problem. People are so focused on the end goal that they don't focus on, what am I learning? What am I getting out of this? And particularly, I think like the SAT and just standardized testing in general, it it doesn't have the impact that people want it to. They think that standardized testing is a way to measure the school's excellence. It's really not. It's not measuring how much the teachers have taught you. It's not measuring how smart the child is or how capable the child is. It is measuring how well you know how to take the test. People who take the SAT, like let's say they score, not so great. Let's say like they score below like a 1500. I'm not saying that's a bad score, but if they do, it's not saying that that child is not capable or able to like, be successful in an Ivy League school or in a very, prestigious university. It's just saying they didn't have the training to succeed on that SAT exam, right? And that goes for so many different things in the education system. It's not just the SAT. I think that the way the school system is built, and I mentioned this before, right? It's always about that academic validation. Kids aren't put into the school system and expected to flourish in the way that they're meant to flourish. They're expected to flourish in the way the teachers expect them to. So, we're analyzing, books and like we read The Great Gatsby, right? And one thing my English teacher, she always did was she always focused on her perspective and what she thought was right. And whenever we brought up something else, it was like, no, 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 no. Think about it this way. And yes, it pushes us, but it pushes us to think in one particular way. And the education system has improved. It has allowed us to, you know, think think more creatively. But to an extent, there's only so far it's gone because everyone is so focused on being so perfect. And I keep coming back to this because it's something that I've felt just being in the United States and, going through school ever since like I came here in first grade and I've completed all my education
Would you
until
did you grow up in India or originally or?
I was born in India, and then I came to US and kindergarten in India, and then everything else I've done
Okay.
here. Yeah, it's complicated. But I've done, from first grade, I've been here for school. And I literally remember this. It's like traumatic because when I think about it, it's like all my teachers would say like, "Oh, Samyuktha, you're so good at school. You're so good at school," or like, "Great job." And yes, you feel good when you get that test back and it's 100, right? But what happens when you don't get that 100? What happens when you get the 80 or when you get the 70 and you're like, oh, I don't feel so good anymore. You're not getting that validation anymore. They don't teach you to learn. They teach you how to either be the best or just look at the people who are the best and try to learn from them. And the problem is we're so geared towards that competitive nature and that competitive environment that we're not thought to think for ourselves. So when I was applying to programs and when I was trying to get into like one of the main reasons I got into research was because I was like, well, all my friends are doing it. They're like the ones who are considered successful. So I want to do that too. And now that I got into research, I love it. But initially, I was just doing it for the fact that, other people were doing it. So it breeds a competitive nature that I don't think is healthy. And I think a lot of kids after they get into college and stuff, they have to heal from that competitive nature because the school system is breeding the next generation of adults. And do you really want the next generation of adults to hate each other and only compete with each other? Because yes, competition breeds like the best thing possible, but wouldn't it be better if people were allowed to focus on the things that they liked and that they were passionate about and not just have to compare themselves to someone else? That's a
Hmm.
question I think the education system has to ask.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think some degree of competition I can understand is useful in a way to, but I think
Absolutely.
when it takes you away from what you're passionate about just to achieve some arbitrary goal that doesn't really make much sense to you,
Absolutely.
that's where I can see it start to take a wrong turn. But from what you said, there's two things I found kind of interesting that we can dive into. So First of all, I guess the definition of education has changed over thousands of years. That I guess we originally just think about like what even is education, like what do we even
Yeah.
define as education? I'm sure originally it was just like to make the highest quality like citizen or to make a well-rounded person and to help them learn about what I don't know the universe or math or just help them like to develop intellectually and spiritually or in whatever way education has been defined over the years. And I think now education has become more of a means to an end where instead of going to education to really learn and delve into what you're passionate about or to become a contributing member of society, it's kind of just become a I need to get this score to get into this school to get into this career, and then it really becomes black and white in a way where now instead of you're really like learning more. People will find avenues to get the score, even avoiding the learning, right? Like they might find a strategy to approach a test that might not be geared towards learning, but more geared towards achieving that score. They might, I mean, if your goal is just to get the score to get into a school, then you're going to take other strategies as well, like cheating as well is going to grow as well. If you all you care about is getting the score, and if you don't even care about the learning aspect of it, then I don't think you'll learn as much from the material as well. So I think our definition of education has changed a lot over the years, but I think for society today, what do you think is a useful way to define education?
I don't think you can put one definition to education, but I think education is really about taking what you already know and taking what other people know and putting it together so that you can become the best version of yourself. So listening to others and I don't think that you're the best version of yourself already. I think, you're working towards that. And a lot of people, what they think is that if they follow one person and they listen to everything that one person says, that one professor, that one, like guru you found online, that one mentor, that everything is going to solve itself out for you, or if you just go to that one school. But the education system is designed in a purposeful way so that you can learn from as many people and as many perspectives as possible. And I think being an avid listener and being able to take on what other people are saying and use it to your benefit, that is what education is. Because you can't learn and you can't just focus on one person's path. Like I had this one friend, she said, I just look at the one person who's successful and I want to just become like them. I copy everything they do and that's how I succeed. But I don't think that's an effective way to be successful because if you just follow what that one person did, there's so much learning and so many lessons that you're missing out on. So I would say pick at least five people in your life. And they don't have to be people you know personally. They can be people that you admire from afar and you watch their YouTube videos or like whatever. And you take in their lessons. Of course, you have your teachers and everything, but at a higher level, education is really what are you absorbing from the world and what can you make out of it?
Hmm. Yeah, so a degree of continual improvement, but also not becoming so locked into one central mindset so that you're able to develop and change with time. Um, I think one mindset I like to use for myself is that if there's someone I really, really look up to and I find his work fascinating or anything and I follow their work, I always ask myself like, what is their worst point? And if
Yeah,
you can't define that, then it's probably less of you actually getting education from them and more you're just kind of joining a cult from them, you know? Like you really have to define like, okay, am I really just learning lessons from them or am I just like believing everything he's putting in my mind? So it's
yeah.
useful to think back, both if there's someone to look up to, what is their worst point? But if there's someone I absolutely hate, what is their best point? I've done that as well because sometimes when you don't like someone, you'll automatically just think everything they say is wrong. But I think even like some of my worst enemies, I've learned like really good lessons from them as well. So I think that's a useful thing to do. Um, but yeah, I think you were mentioning earlier about how test scores can impact a child who's learning and developing. And I think some people might respond to that by saying that some level of dissatisfaction is good for the continual improvement. But I do think that I know you've researched a lot about the brain, and I'm sure you'll understand that at an early age, your brain is very, really, really plastic, and meaning it's changing a lot and so susceptible to little things that might happen in the background that might sit as a belief in their brain for the rest of their life. I think that's where a lot of insecurities and things come from as well. Um, and I think that what I've learned and read, self-image is one of the most important traits you need in a young kid, right? If you're 4 or 5 years old and your mom keeps telling you like you're really athletic, you're really athletic, you're really athletic, even if it's not true, I guarantee you that down the road that will be their self-image, and then they'll take the action that reflects someone with that positive self-image. So, tell me more about what you've learned about like brain plasticity in general, and do you think like self-image is also an important aspect of early childhood as well?
Self-image is such an important aspect, not just of early childhood, but as people get older, because as you said, when kids are growing up, right? And this has to do with education too. When they're consistently told you're really good at school, you're really good at school, you're really good at school, it gets ingrained in your head and you that becomes you because you feel like, oh, you're great. And at first it's this great high because you're like, oh my God, like I'm the best, obviously. But then as you get older, and like let's say you do falter and you don't do as well on something, it doesn't just have to be something as simple as a test, right? It can be like a kind of series of things where you feel like you're just not doing as well as you could. You start to question your beliefs and you start to question whether they really meant what they said, and you start to feel like what am I even working towards if I'm not proving the point that they made so long ago? And self-image, it's really based on your subconscious mind, and the subconscious mind, it has to do a lot with the beliefs that you have. And the beliefs that you have, like, I think that you can change your beliefs. A lot of people say you can't, right? Because they say, oh, those are the core beliefs that they're set in stone. Like that's how you are for the rest of your life. But that's not true. I do a lot of like self-help work. I read a lot of self-help books. I know Dr. Nan talks about that too in her podcast, but I've done that for the past like 4 years. Ever since I started the blog, I really got into self-help work. And one thing they always say is that your beliefs are just the thoughts that you continuously think, right? So if you think a thought so many different times, so many times, that's what you're going to end up believing. So if you keep telling yourself, I'm a bad student, I'm a bad student, I'm a bad student, that's what you're going to end up believing. And then the results that you see are what that's going to reflect that. But then if you keep telling yourself, I'm a good student, I'm a good student, I'm a good student, at first you're not going to believe it. At first you're going to think, well, I'm just lying to myself, I'm being delusional. But to a certain point, delusion is necessary. To a certain point, I think it's important to push your limits just a little bit, like every single day. I think that you have to say to yourself, if I want to improve how I feel about myself and the way I think about myself, you have to push yourself to some extent. If you just believe what you've already been believing, you're not going to grow, right? And I was literally watching a TikTok the other day and it was like how to glow up, right? And the first thing that they said was you have to stop being yourself. And I'm like what the heck? Like you have to stop being yourself. But it was basically her saying if you want to be a better version of yourself, you can't do what you've already been doing, right? So if you want to change your self-image, or if you really want to get into like self-help work and improving yourself to be a better person, honestly, you really just have to look at what you're doing now that's not serving your future. And that's something a lot of people aren't willing to do. Like like I'm a very like anxious person, so I would always check like oh, like this is what this person said. I would always go back to people's like text messages, right? And I'd be like I'd reread them like, oh my God, this is what they said. And I would just ingrain that in my head. Like if someone said something rude to me, I would just keep thinking that over and over again. And you're allowed to have good days, you're allowed to have bad days, but there was just a point when I would only think about that. And I just told myself one day, I was like, no, you can't do that anymore. You have to step it up and you have to be able to think for yourself because other people can't do that for you. And the biggest thing about self-image is self-love. Because if you don't love yourself and you don't respect yourself, you're not going to get to the places where you want to go. I think a lot of people determine self-image through the validation that they get from other people, but that's such a screwed up way of getting validation because other people can have thoughts, other people's thoughts change, right? Like think about like influencers, right? One day like they're literally at their peak and the next day they're getting canceled for something that they said like 10 years ago, right? If you solely base the value and respect you have for yourself out of what other people say or the test score that you receive or the validation that you're getting from school, you're never going to achieve your highest potential. That validation, that respect has to come from yourself. And
Hmm.
that self-image it's truly based in what you believe and what you think about yourself.
You can't outsource your self-image to the crowd. You can't outsource it to other people, a test score, any external thing. You really need to find that within yourself. And I guess there's different ways you can get there. I think although like we mentioned that maybe a test score might not be the best way of determining your self-worth. I think in some way achievements can help with self-image.
Of
If they're
course.
meaningful ones, right? Like if you go out and you achieve something that you didn't think you could achieve and it's meaningful to you, then you're gonna get a positive self-image. Like I'm sure that when you worked in helping so many kids with their education and that was something so passionate to you, I'm sure that improved your self-image, right? Because all of a sudden you're not outsourcing your self-perception and self-love to some external thing, and all of a sudden it's something you find within yourself now. And um, I think that in life, I think everything comes down to beliefs. Anyone I look at is really, really successful. They always had a self-belief in themselves along the way, either early on, or they had some conviction in the back of their mind that they're gonna make some kind of success. And I think that my dad is a similar example. When he was younger, he grew up in more like in a third like, he grew up in India, but more like a third world type of area in the more in the village area, and they didn't have much money growing up, but he was obsessed with collecting stamps of different countries around the world, like Switzerland and Sweden. And he just kind of had a belief in the back of his mind that one day he'll visit all those countries. And he had no idea of how he's going to get there. And he would tell like his mom's like, yeah, that's so unrealistic. That's never going to happen. But for some reason, he just had that conviction in the back of his mind and the subconscious mind, as you're talking about, and no idea how he's going to get there. But all of a sudden, like 50 years later, here he is now, right? And I think that we all do have like certain beliefs in the back of our mind, like certain convictions that in the current realm of the world today, it might seem so unrealistic, but considering how exponential our growth is as a human society, I'm sure that 50 years from now will just be the new normal, right? So, um, I think that if you really, when I look at periods of my life where I grew the most, it was always came from a point where I somehow changed my self-image in a way, where I started looking at myself as a different person. And sometimes it's achievements that help you achieve that, whether it be like making like transitioning from a friend group that I did not like a lot to all of a sudden establishing a group of friends that I really respected a lot, and that kind of updates your self-image because you're like, wait, I can actually achieve that. And then achievements I made through wrestling and achievements I made through just doing like projects on my own that I was really passionate about. And I think as those updated my self-image and I looked at myself better, I was able to achieve a lot more success in those areas as well.
Absolutely.
So when you talk about the problem with making grades as a determiner of our self-image, the education system, what do you think is an alternative way to help maybe kids early on who are growing up? I mean, I think there's some way you need some strategy in order to assess kids in a way to
Mhm.
help them move in a positive direction. I think there's some way you can set goals for the kids as they're improving in the education system. And right now it's kind of solely focused on grades and numbers. So do you have any alternative ideas for what we can be doing to maybe help kids both build that self-image, but also assess them along the way besides like test scores and grades?
I think that the school system should establish a way for kids to set goals, and the setting of those goals and the accomplishment of those kind of milestones along the way, that should be the assessment. Because yes, the school system focuses on like the core subjects of math, language arts, all of that. And I think testing is somewhat a useful way of getting kind of information about how well the kid is doing in that subject. But as for success in general, I think that if the kid wants to follow a certain path, setting the goals along the way to achieve, that ultimate dream, that's one of the most successful ways. Like, for example, for me, I got into poetry when I was in second grade, right? So, my second grade teacher, I didn't even know what a poem was. Like, like I've heard of it, but like I didn't really know how to write one or anything. And my teacher was like, "All right, like I want to sign you up for this competition," and she gave me just like a few examples of what the poems were, and I sat down and I wrote them. I still have the copies from second grade. Like, it's insane. Like, I still have like the cutout of like the cupcake I made of the concrete poem. It's insane. And that for me was just such a kind of guiding factor of how I kind of assessed my self-worth, not just the writing of the poem, but the fact that I could learn something new. And the school system doesn't even focus on that, I feel like. Like, you learn something new every day, you learn something new every week, right? And it's just like this ongoing sense of like, okay, like next thing, next thing, next thing, let's test, let's go to the next thing. But you never get the time to sit down and be like, wow, like I actually learned that. Like it takes a lot of hard work to get there. And having like mini kind of competitions or I know a lot of schools have clubs, right? And a lot of kids, they just join the club or they just do the thing to kind of get the credit for college. But that's something I don't resonate with. Like, I know you have to do it because you want the board position so you can get into, National Honor Society and all of that. But I don't really resonate with that so much because I feel like if you do something and you're genuinely passionate about the thing you're doing, you will get a lot more, you'll feel a lot more content and you'll get a lot more fulfillment from that thing. So going back to the whole poetry story, I wrote these poems. I didn't think I would, win the competition. I was like, all right, maybe. And I actually did end up winning, and I got to read my poems on like this little stage. It was so fun. I was like literally in second grade reading these poems. And I remember something my mom said. So there was this girl, I believe she went like right after I read my poems. She read this poem about her father. And I remember my mom saying that that really just touched her soul. Like that was something that really resonated with her. And I remember thinking to myself, like, hey, I want to do something like that. Like I want to touch people's lives through my work. Like I really want to make that impact. And at the time I was in second grade. I wasn't writing like these very meaningful poems. I literally wrote a poem about like going to the park. I wrote a poem about like cupcakes. Like it's not that deep. But then now I feel like as I've kind of progressed through life, and I've gone through different periods of feeling a certain way about myself. I've felt really good about myself sometimes, and I felt kind of mediocre about myself. I felt really bad about myself. And every single period of my life, I have writing. And I have writing that I can look back on and I can reflect, like, oh, hey, like this is how I felt. And some of that writing comes from journal entries, which are very direct, like, okay, this is how I felt about myself. And other periods of time, it was like, I literally used to write like fanfics about people. Like I'd be like, this is how I want my life to look. So I'm going to take people from my life and I'm going to change their names and write a whole thing. And this is how like we're going to look in like 5 years. And then other times I would write just like made up stories or something I'm really, really into is poetry. And how I got into poetry was because I was in such a bad place in my life, like last January, and I was like at the bottom of it all. And I had this really bad friendship with someone. It was horrible. We had so much beef. And I was like, okay, he said something at this birthday party. And I was like, really? You're gonna go there? You're really gonna say that? So I wrote a poem, worst point of my life, like ever, I would probably say, or one of the worst points of my life. That poem changed the trajectory of my life, like completely. And that poem, the title of it is You Called Her Pretty. And that totally just it got me into poetry again. And I remember thinking like, oh my God, like why is this happening to me? Genuinely, why is this happening to me? But if I hadn't written that poem, and if I hadn't, started to write more poems in the writing program I was a part of, and if I hadn't chosen to like post them on my blog and share them with the people that I loved, I wouldn't have gotten to where I was today, and I wouldn't have, started what I wanted to start. So I think self-image really has to do a lot with where you are at in life. And the school system, the school system can do a lot of things. Like, I think teachers can guide you and help you get to where you want to go. And that's what my teacher did for me. A lot of times they're so focused on just the school subject that they're teaching. I think we honestly need a class where we're solely focused on what we as kids really want to achieve. And because we're not always going to have competitions or programs that are going to help you do that, and not every teacher is going to help you, sign up for a competition. I think genuinely having a class or a place where kids can come together and just see what they can do to grow, that's what I would do.
Hmm. Really interesting. I find the story with poetry pretty interesting because it's amazing how it kind of serves as a time capsule over the last, I don't know, like 10, I mean, since second grade, so 5, 6 years maybe.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, so I kind of feel that way with the podcast, and I've done some journalings in the last like 2 years, so it kind of does serve as a time capsule where you can look back at the way your emotions evolved over time, and especially with the podcast, since I started this about a year ago, if I can continue doing this for the rest of my life, it'll always be like I can always access a conversation from every stage of my life, and I think in that way you can always look back at your own development as a person and see like the different like, stages of life you went through, which I think a lot of people, once if you don't have some way to access that, you can easily lose that. But I find it interesting how you can also do that through poetry, because I guess with journaling, like it's very, very like exact and literal, like this is exactly what happened. But with a podcast, it's like actually what I'm saying in my experiences, right? But I think poetry is it's a form of art in a way where you can't really access the exact details, but you can more access the emotion in a way. So I mean, it must be incredible to have that kind of time capsule over the years.
It's beautiful because, the thing about poetry that I love so much is that I look back at a poem from like a different point in my life and like I felt so different about that. Like a lot of times I write poems about people or experiences that I've had, and a lot of them are about people. And I honestly, a lot of my poems sound really negative, but it's my way of like, the Taylor Swift has this one quote. I love Taylor Swift. It's like sometimes writing like the most negative thing or like writing that really, really sad poem, it kind of sucks the venom out of like the snake bite. And it's like it helps you process. So just because I write negative things or just because I write a really, really angry poem, it doesn't mean like I'm an angry person, a pretty happy, like bubbly person, but it really just helps me process. So one thing I love about poetry though is that it helps connect people. And I'm in this writing program. I've done it for the past 4 years. Hopefully I can do it for the next two because you have to like apply every year. But I remember sitting down and reading a poem. I wrote a poem. We had 15 minutes to write. It was a very long poem, actually. I was very like, wow, I didn't know I had all that in me. So I got up and I was sharing my poem. And the one person came up to me, we had break, and she was like, wow, like after you read that poem, I could connect that to one of my friends. Like she was great. And then eventually she was like this horrible person. Like I was like, oh my God, like you could relate to my writing, like you could do that, like that's really cool, like wow, I made that, I kind of felt like wow. And I write a lot of poetry about this one experience that I've had in my life and how it's kind of evolved. And it's always about that, like there's like like a few people in my life that I always write about, and it's because I've known them for so long, and kind of how our relationship changes is tracked through my poems. And I remember I read a poem in that class, in that program once, and I was so angry. Like I wasn't angry in the moment, but when I wrote that poem, I was so angry. So I kind of channeled that as I was reading. And I love presenting my poems because I think that's the most important thing about it. Because a lot of like some writers, their work is meant to be just read. They're, read like sitting in a quiet place. My work it's written to be presented. And presenting is such a huge part of my life when it comes to writing. So I read this poem and I'm looking at like a spot on the wall. Like you don't look at your audience, you just look at that one spot on the wall, or like kind of you look out, right? Like I'm a dancer, like you always look out. You don't like look at one specific thing. And right after I finished, someone was like, you always seem like whenever you read your poems, you always seem like you're talking to that person. Like you're having like an intimate conversation with them and you're like kind of like ratting them out about everything they've done and like really just yelling at them. And I think that's what's so beautiful about poetry. It's funny. It's like ironic. But what I love about it is that I can channel my emotions and really process how I feel through my art. And it's something I've been so passionate about for such a long time. And before it was really just prose and like long like narrative pieces, and now it's more so poetry. And that's why I started, the poetry program. I started that last year. It's funny. I was talking to my friend actually, and I was like, it'd be really cool. Like, it would be really cool if I had a program where like kids learn how to write poetry, because it's one thing I really, really care about. Because a lot of people, what they do, especially if they're going into like a STEM path, is they'll start a program that's geared towards a STEM career. And they'll start a program that's like, okay, I'm going to teach kids how to do like STEM experiments, or they'll teach about like, neuroscience or whatever. And that's really, really cool. But I knew like I wasn't that kind of person. Like I didn't want to start um a very STEM-based program because that's not what I was super duper passionate about. So I said, what am I really passionate about? Writing. Writing is something I've always cared about. My blog and podcast, it's been something I've cared about for the past 4 years, but I wanted to do something where I could kind of work more hands-on with kids. And I was like, well, what am I passionate about? Poetry. And to think the people will tell you like, you can't do that, or people are not going to care about that. Like it's poems. Like who wants to write poems? But I said, I really care about this and I'm going to reach out. And it's so funny. You always meet the people you need to meet at the right time in your life. It's so funny. It's incredible
It makes you
because
wonder about the universe in general too.
exactly. Like you're like, wow, everything does happen for a reason. So I did like a TED talk for my high school, and it was like for Parent University. And a contact from middle school signed me up for that. And he has been a huge mentor. He's been a huge part of my life. And he recommended me for that TED talk. And through that TED talk, I met the principal of the elementary school that I went to. It was a new principal. So like, I hadn't met her yet. And she like messed up my name. So she remembered me. She messed up it was, I get it, I have like long Indian names. So she messed up my name on the podium. And she was so like, flustered. I was like, it's okay, it's okay. And through that, she remembered me. And I reached out to her a few weeks later and I was like, hey, I have this idea for a program. Could we do it at the elementary school? If I hadn't if I hadn't met that teacher in middle school, if he hadn't recommended me for this TED Talk, I would not have met Dr. Revere, who helped me set up the whole program at Ben Franklin Elementary School. And it's so like it's a kismet, and you're just like, wow, you really met the people that you really needed to meet. Because I reached out to like other schools, and with emails, people don't always respond, but she responded. And I was like, great. And she's actually best friends with the superintendent of Edison schools. So I'm like, great contact to have, right? So we started the program, and it started as kind of this small thing. I didn't even know where it was going. I was like, I just want to teach kids poetry. And now it's evolved. So we created a 4-week curriculum that's integrated into schools. And so this year, how it worked was during the month of February, those 4 weeks, every week, the kids would watch one video, the teachers would play it, and they would write that one poem. So we did sonnets, acrostic poems, concrete poems. I think we did haikus as well. And those were the 4 poems that we did. Now we're expanding to include more poems because obviously different grade levels can only write certain types of poems, right? Like they're complicated and easy at the same time. So after that, the kids wrote so many more than like 400, 500 kids were involved in this program. And now, at the end of the program, what they did was during March, they kind of fixed up some poems and they were able to enter them in a contest. And we had over 70 entries, and that led to Poetry Night in April. April is National Poetry Month. It's one of my favorite months. And they were able to present their poems at the Poetry Cafe. And it made me feel like I gave a speech at that event because I was like, founder director is pretty cool. So at that event, I said, I'm standing here, but and I'm giving this speech and I founded this program, but I was one of you guys. I was one of those kids presenting a poem back in second grade, and I felt like I made that little girl's dream come true, like me as a little girl. And I felt like, wow, I took something that was, something that really stuck with me when I was younger. It was something that I really kept replaying in my head. Whenever I was having a bad day, I'd always think like, well, I won that poetry contest, like I'm good at something. And I wanted to give kids that opportunity to maybe explore something that they could be good at, right? So just being able to sit there and say, hey, I did something that impacted all of these kids, it was something really, really powerful to me. And a lot of kids start nonprofits in high school. A lot of kids do. And a lot of people just leave it. They leave it after they go to college, or, when they get older, like, I'm done with that thing. But for me, poetry is so, so much bigger than that. Like, I know someone who, he got involved with a nonprofit. He didn't found it. He wasn't the founder of it, but he got involved with one of the nonprofits. And they have chapters, like they started with like nothing, and now they have chapters in like so many different states. And I'm like, well, we're not there yet. We only have like a few chapters. Like we just started last year and we're not there yet. I'm like, what's the problem? Like, am I just bad at what I'm doing? But no, I'm not, because I started to think about the way our program works. And the way our program works is we are integrated into the school's curriculum. And we can't just have student leads. Like a lot of programs, what they have is just youth chapter leaders, right? Like you just contact your friends, or you go on LinkedIn and you just find like random people, like, hey, can you start a chapter? Like you care about this. But for us, we have to go through the superintendent, we have to go through the principals and the language arts department, we have to get all that approval. But through that approval, we get hundreds of kids, right? With just one school, we get hundreds of kids and that impact. So I was really beating myself up, and I was like, we don't have that many chapters. But what was the point of this program in the first place? Like I went back to that. I was like, what was the mission statement of this program? It was to help kids learn poetry and hopefully give them the tools to write their own poems and explore their passions and really just kind of talk about what they cared about or what they wanted to express through a form of writing that I don't think schools teach properly, because poetry is so skimmed over. And I wanted to give kids the resources to actually learn it in a way that I think they would enjoy. And I went back to that mission statement and I said, we did that. We did that. It's not about how many chapters you have. The numbers, that's one thing I believe. The numbers will come. The numbers will come. The success will come. You have to just focus on the what you like. Literally, I think the quote that I have in my Gmail profile, it's don't focus on like the how. If your why and your what is big enough, the how it'll come. you'll be good. So I always remind myself of that. It's not always just about how are you going to get there? Because I was like, oh my God, I don't know that many people. How am I going to expand the program that much? But the success will follow. The success will always follow if you believe in what you're doing and you care about what you're doing.
Definitely agree. Yeah. I think that incentive matters a lot too, right? If your incentive is just to have another list on the resume, then you're always going to start getting stressed out by the number of chapters you have and the numbers and the impact. Like, did it impact 1,000 kids or 2,000 kids? Like, it's obviously such a big difference. Even if you're maybe if you could just focus on 10 kids, it impact their lives a lot more than if you focus on 2,000 by giving a little impact. I think it's really important to have that mission statement, which I'm amazed that you're able to establish that and live by that. Because I guess I had a similar realization with that a couple of weeks ago with the podcast itself. Because I mean, I feel like sometimes I can jump back and forth between like just doing it for the love of it versus like trying to optimize it for growth. And I think there's a way you can do it in a way that keeps it beautiful, but there's also a way you can do it to optimize it and make the video length exactly like 30 minutes long and get a certain like caliber of guests and to edit the video so you can remove all like the boring parts out and optimize the thumbnail, make it clickbaity, and every like small detail you can do to try to optimize it and grow it. And I sometimes I get the random ideas like maybe I should spend like an hours a day making shorts so I can grow it on TikTok or whatever. But I think it comes down to like why am I doing this in the first place? And I actually sat down and wrote about this, like what is the goal of the podcast, right? And I think that down the road it would be nice to make money off of it, but I think at the age I'm at right now, it's not money's not a big incentive for me at the moment, but it could be down the road if I were to grow it. But I guess when I thought back to what is the mission behind the podcast, I found out that the reason I started it is because that I found a weird fascination with conversations. I think we all have our weird like fascinations with things. Like you seem to be really interested in poetry. For some reason, conversations are really interesting to me, and I sometimes see podcasts where people are able to sit down and hold a 3 hour conversation with almost anyone in the world, right? I know that people have like mixed opinions about Joe Rogan, but one thing I'm fascinated about him is that he's literally had thousands and thousands of people on. He has a 3 hour conversation with all of them. Like the level of open-mindedness you need to just sit down with anyone that you might not have never met before either, and just have a conversation with them. And the way it flows from topic to topic, like we didn't really plan this discussion like exactly what we're going to talk about. We kind of just started with neuroscience and let it kind of just take its path wherever it goes. I think all these little details, I personally was like really fascinated by conversations in general, but it's also a great way you can learn from other people. You can learn from other people's life experiences and a way that since we're recording it and posting it, other people can derive value out of it as well. So I guess I kind of realized that I can't really control whether it's number one in the world in viewership, but I do have control whether it's number one in the world in value. So if I just focus only on keeping it something fun that I enjoy doing, but also trying to put as much value in the video as possible. So if someone sees it and clicks on it and learns about your stories with poetry and how you're able to navigate your life path, going down the finance path, but now actually pursuing what you're interested by, like, people might be inspired by that and they're able to learn from that. So I think my mindset shift was that how can I just provide as much value as possible in the same way that you were just focused on how could I impact as many kids' lives as possible? You can look back at your own life experiences with poetry and thinking that I want to help these young second graders achieve their dreams. And I think for anyone who's trying to achieve anything in life, you need to first establish like what's the main goal, like the big overarching goal. And also just think back like what are your incentives behind this? Are you just trying to grow it for the sake of growing it, or do you find some like intrinsic love and value in the work you do as well?
Personally, I started poetry like I started the poetry program because I really wanted kids to learn about poetry because I think that it's such a skimmed over topic in English classes. We'll always talk about poetry kind of in conjunction with a book, or it's kind of like a side topic, or you'll overanalyze a poem so much to a point where you don't care about it anymore. And like you could recite it in your like you'll wake up and you'll be like, nothing gold can stay. Like, you could recite the whole poem. But
And one thing I wanted to cut you off. Like I never understood the concept of like memorizing poems for poetry day. Like,
yeah,
what's the point of
exactly. What
that?
is the point? Exactly. Like for me, when I present poems, I hate memorizing the poem. I had to do it. Like I was doing a pageant and my like talent portion of the pageant was literally like like reciting You Called Her Pretty. It was that poem. And I had to cut it down and I had to memorize that thing. It was like literally the worst thing. Like it was horrible because it took the love and passion out of it. I love poetry and I love presenting it. The day before I was crying. Like I have never cried over writing a poem before and having to present it, but I was so stressed because I'm like, why am I so stressed about something that I love so much? Like I shouldn't have to be this stressed about it. And I don't think that you should ever do something that you don't care about. And having to memorize that was just, it was just too much for me. So I'm like, I'm never gonna have to do that. never going to force anyone to do that. I think you should just do what you like. So I knew a teacher who would memorize like Robert Frost, like his long poems, Shakespeare. She would memorize them. I'm like, no, that's not for me. I hate memorizing poetry. It's not something I like, but I love reciting it. And if I have to memorize it, I can. Like it's not that I hate it, I just don't like it. I prefer to just read it off of a piece of paper. But the reason I started the program was because I wanted to make it something that people enjoyed and cared about, and I wanted to kind of give people the opportunity to pursue that because honestly, I was talking about the STEM programs. There are so many things where there are so many opportunities for people to learn about like heart health. There are so many people to learn. There are so many opportunities for people to learn about neuroscience. I'm going into neuroscience, and I didn't start that because I felt like there were so many avenues to learn about mental health and all of that, and I'm involved in those programs. I didn't found them. The reason I started poetry was there was just wasn't one resource where I felt like kids could learn about poetry in an accessible manner. And there wasn't a program that I felt like did it in the way that I think would help kids the most. Because honestly, if you just host a workshop, it's not going to get through to kids. It's not. Because I used to host workshops as like in seventh grade, I would host them through my blog. And I did one workshop about like time management. I did one workshop about like, achieving your goals. And workshops stick, but I think that integrating into the curriculum sticks a lot more because when you're actively kind of encouraged to do that thing and there are people around you who are doing that thing and you're putting in the time and effort to do it, you're like, whoa, like I could do this. I learned something cool. And I wanted kids to kind of get that sense of satisfaction because I feel like poetry is such an undervalued thing that people don't care about that much. But when they start to work with it, they're like, this is actually really, really cool. And as I was, thinking like, how am I going to expand? How am I going to reach more people? I just sat down with myself and I was like, you know what? The right people will come. I will meet the people I need to meet and the right people will respond. And actually I just kind of cold emailed like a school in India and I was like, you know what the heck? Like the worst they can do is not respond, right? So I just emailed them and then I got a response. They set up a call and they're like, we would love to integrate poetry. And now poetry is an international program and this happened all last week. So I was like, wow, anything can happen. And that impact, I think if you stay true to your mission and you stay true to the fact that you're here to help people and you just focus on what you want to do with that, the right people will always come to you. Like for me, when I write my poems, I don't focus on what are people going to get out of the poem or what are they going to think about this or what would they want me to write. I always focus on what do I want to write, what do I love, because if you continue to do what you love, the right people and the right audience will find you. You don't have to chase down people.
Yeah.
I don't, and that's something that's I will always believe in for like anything. You never have to chase down people, whether that be friends, relationships, or people for your program. The right people will always come to you.
And I think the thing with if you're writing poetry standardized to a certain audience, then it won't be as meaningful anymore as well. And I think if you look at how there's 8 billion people in the world, I'm sure there's at least like 1,000 people that are similar to you and have similar interests. And if you can find those 1,000 people, then whatever art you do, whether it's podcasts or poetry, like it'll impact them just like to such a significant degree more than if you just made something standardized for the crowd. So yeah, I definitely agree with that. Um, when you were growing your poetry program, what do you think is the biggest challenge you faced? Would it be something related to maybe integrating some of like the things you learned about neuroscience research to the program, or even in general, just a broad question? Like, what do you think is one of the biggest challenges you face with that?
I think people don't always believe in your mission, right? And you can kind of let that get into your head, and they'll tell you, it's not going to be successful if you expand so much, or they'll tell you, just keep it small. And I'm not someone who likes to play small. I like to I always like to jump the gun. I'll be like, okay, step one, now step 10. Like the middle steps don't always like matter to me, but I think they're so important because I've had this one person in my life. He was a mentor for me that started in fifth grade. He was my fifth grade gym teacher, but he was also the like advisor for Field to Play 60 in my school, which is like a program. It was a youth leadership program. And I grew in that program. It was great. And then it kind of changed up. But I met him in fifth grade. And every kind of big idea that I have, whatever, I was like, I really want to bring to him. So when I got the idea for poetry and I established at Ben Franklin, which is actually where I met him. Now he's like a vice principal in West Hampton. I was like, all right, I really want to bring this idea to you. And I reached out to him. And what he said was, I know you really want to go for something big. And this is a piece of advice that I will stick to. Like he's someone I trust with like my life. Like I would literally always listen to him. He said, don't just focus on like comparing yourself to other people and where they're going and like how big their program is. If you want the quality of your program to last and you want a strong foundation, build it from the ground up, which you've already started to do. But make sure that your foundation is so strong that as you go into the future, it's easy. If you work hard now, things get easy, right? You know that like thing where it's like you're so high maintenance so that you can be low maintenance. That's kind of what he was talking about. He was saying, we'll start off with like 5 school districts. We won't go that big. But then over time, when you've built your foundation and you have people who can vouch for your program and say, hey, this is a really good thing, more people will listen, right? And that's what's so unique about the poetry program. It's the fact that it's not just youth-led chapters. It's not flimsy. It's a program with a strong foundation and a strong base. And it doesn't look big when you just look at it from the start. But the impact that it makes in kids' lives. And that's something I had to tell myself too, because honestly, the biggest challenge I faced with this program is making myself believe like, I'm doing enough. Like I am enough and this program is enough. And the foundation we're building and the people I've met along the way, they've told me, this is great. You're helping young kids. And I think that if you just stick to what you really want to do and you focus on that and you grow that, right? Like like last year we just had the 4 videos and then we had like an intro video and just talked to the staff. It was very minimal effort. But then this year what we're doing is we're creating teacher guides and we're making more videos and we're getting a social media started up and we have like a website and all of that, right? And we're getting so much more and we're going to host like workshops. And I think the biggest thing that you can take away from growing a program and really working at the heart of it is make sure you have help and make sure that you ask for advice. Because something that I've always done and that I've grown to learn that this is not the right way to do it is you really just have to make sure that you have the people there to support you. Because one thing that I've learned is that I've always kind of been that person who takes on the challenge. I'm like, I want to do everything by myself. But if you just look for that and you just look for the credit out of doing that, you're not going to grow as much as you can, right? So even for my blog and podcast, what I did was I never wanted other people to get involved in it. I didn't want people to touch my work. I built the entire website in a day. Like in 6th grade, I made that website and I said, I'm going to build it from the ground up and I'm going to get started. I'm going to host workshops. I'm going to do all of it. And the reason I started that whole blog was because someone else started a blog in my life and I was like, I want to beat them and I want to be better than them. And that that kind of competition, it bred a really, really toxic relationship with me and my self-worth. And that's something that I didn't want to bring to poetry because I was like, I want to build something that's pure and genuine. And all the other parts of my life, I wanted to make them pure and genuine too. So I sat down with myself and, my blog, I wasn't posting on it regularly. And I had a quote of the day email that I was doing and I stopped doing that. And I was like, why? What's the problem? It's because the foundation wasn't strong enough. I built that foundation out of the validation I got from other people, right? I built that foundation out of wanting to be better than someone else. But that is not a strong foundation. And you can't build something off of the need for winning a competition that you just made up in your head. You can't do that. So I sat back and was like, what can I do to make this better? So for my blog, now I run a team of writers who I'm also part of the team of writers. I do write for my blog, but I have other people who write for me too, because I can't do everything at once. And I think asking for that help is necessary. I have people who run the social media team. I have people who reach out and recruit people. I have all those people. And then for the poetry program, I can't just push things out to schools and expect them to do it. I need a team of teachers who are willing to do that too. And really working with them and just talking to them and just knowing that, you have a strong foundation and you have people you can trust. That's one of the most valuable lessons I've learned.
Amazing. So when you first built this team of people working for you on the blog and the podcast, you mentioned that before it was you were scared to delegate work to other people. You kind of wanted to make it like your own show. And when you first established that team of people, did you still find it like a difficult transition to start to trust them and to help delegate work to them, even once you've already established that team?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Because I felt like my biggest thing was I didn't know where the blog was going. Because at the beginning, when I started it, it was a self-help blog. Everything I wrote on that blog was motivational. But as time kind of went on, I just felt like I didn't resonate with that as much anymore. And it's a hard thing, to take something that you've worked very, very hard to get to and really, build up. And you're like, I don't really like this anymore. But I didn't want to throw away my audience. I didn't want to throw away the whole thing completely. And another thing that happened was I lost complete access to my Instagram account for the blog. I built up the following and it like everything's gone. And I'm
What
like,
happened to that?
it's horrible. Like, you don't know what to do at that point. So I'm like, great. Now I'm just taking a break. And I took a break for like a year. I was like, I'm not gonna post on this. I'm just gonna sit here and think. And after all the thinking that I did, I was like, well, you know what? I can't do this on my own and I need other people. But when I got writers for the blog and I told them, hey, can we do something motivational? They were like, yeah, but they didn't care about it. So I was thinking to myself, like, even I don't care about this. Why am I writing motivational stuff? So I was like, all right, I want to open up my blog to like kind of just be a place of expression. That's what I call it. It's just a place of expression. I post poems in the blog, I post, narrative pieces, really anything. And it's not a mess. It's honestly, it is a mess. It's a beautiful mess. And that's what I like about it. Because some blogs are very, very geared towards one thing, and that's great, right? Because people genuinely care about that one thing. But for me, my passion is writing and really just expression. So my blog is a place to showcase that. So I built that trust in other people by learning to trust myself and learning to trust my own passion and learning to trust that what I do, as long as I align it with my passions and things that I love and care about, it'll all fall in place. And the people that I'm working with, honestly, I started with like working with my friends and then they would reach out to like people they knew and they were like, hey, like they care about this. And I would get people and people are good at different things, right? Some people are really good at writing. And then I've realized, okay, like we can put you guys on the team, but then other people are really, really organized. So I would put them on like the posting team. And as you get to know people better, you'll realize like there are better people at this than you. And you can learn to kind of take the back seat. And that doesn't mean that you're doing less work. That doesn't mean you're worth less. That means that you're trusting yourself and your brand enough and you know that these people can help you elevate that brand and they can help you do more with it and accomplish more with it. Like my goal with the blog is really to have hundreds of writers, and that's honestly a lot, right? That's honestly a lot of writers to have, but I want so many people to be involved with the work that we're doing with the blog because I want that many people to have an opportunity to really be able to express themselves, and the blog is a place to do that.
Hmm. I found that one of the biggest challenges of the project like this, especially at the high school level, when it's mostly volunteer work, is number one, incentive. That if someone's like late on a post or anything like that, like there's less incentive for them to try to like fix that or be better or more punctual about it. And sometimes you get great people, but then at the end of the day, when it's all volunteer, I think one of the hardest things with like the nonprofit that I worked on in high school and also just I did a blog like a long time ago, freshman year, like a sports blog, but I found that incentivizing people to work, especially if they're your friends, is one of the hardest things. So what have you learned about with leadership along the way?
I think the amount that you I always go back to like self-image and how much you believe in yourself, but it's a constant theme in my life and I think it's so important to touch back on. I've noticed that whenever I stop believing in the blog and I'm like, I don't know, like, why do people, like, I don't care about this. And I would look to other people and them sending me their posts to kind of get that validation, like, okay, like this blog is actually worth something. Whenever I did that, I would, I would have people say, like, I can't do this anymore. Like, I can't join the blog or I can't dedicate any time to this because I'm so busy outside of school. People's priorities are always going to, outweigh just you and the blog, right? But you want to find people that prioritize you and whatever project you're working on. And if they leave, don't take that as meaning that your blog is worth blog or whatever project you're working on. Don't make that mean that you're worth any less than you were when you had them. Don't make that mean that some other project is worth more than yours, right? To them it is, but it doesn't have to mean that. Like I know people who are involved with another organization, but they chose to leave my blog. And that doesn't mean that my blog is worth any less than that other organization. It just means that that's what they're aligned with. And this is what I'm aligned with. So as I navigate that, I really just try to stay true to what am I doing with this blog? What is my goal with this blog? And my blog is I started it because personally I wanted a place to go to when I needed some kind of help and kind of a place to kind of recuperate, right? So I would read all these self-help books and I'd learn these lessons, and not everyone wants to sit and read like tens of hundreds of self-help books. Like they don't have time for that and they don't care about that. But creating a blog where I could kind of put those lessons together into short blog posts, that was something that people were willing to read, and they were genuinely impressed by that. And when I hosted my workshops, not everyone is going to sit there and read like a research paper on how time management or the Pomodoro method is useful. But when I put together like a 1 hour work or like a 30-minute workshop on just how time management could be useful in your life and how you can easily integrate it into your life, it's useful. So I think staying true to what you care about and doing your work, the audience will always come to you. And staying true to kind of listen to the nudges that you get. Like if you think that you should do something, do it. And if you think you shouldn't be doing something, don't do it. Like one time I was trying to like uh, I don't know if you know what Lionsgate is, but Lionsgate was on it's August 8th every single year, right? And it's basically this like great time to manifest, right? And I'm into all of that. So I'm like I was trying to journal, and like
Oh,
this is
wait, what
not
is it? What is that? I don't really understand. Oh, what
Oh,
line?
okay. So it's like this great like energetically like energy wise like a great time to like manifest. Like you journal your things, you write down your goals
Okay.
for the year, and like you feel like good. It's like it's a great time, right? So I'm not super into astrology, but I was like, all right, like I'll do it. It's Lionsgate, like it's nice, right?
Oh, okay.
Yeah. But I was like, all right, I'll journal. Like people are saying it's a good time to journal. But I just didn't feel like journaling that day. And I was just really like sad and like not in the mood to do any of this. So I thought, all right, if I don't want to journal today, what I'm going to do is I'm going to sit and read. And there was this one book I was reading, and it really just kind of helped me get my priorities straight, right? So I think that you should always listen to those nudges and listen to like the idea of like, all right, this is what I want to do with my life. And if you were doing something before and it doesn't resonate with you anymore, you don't have to continue to do that. Your success was built off of you caring about your work. So it's not really about you built your success this way. Like, okay, like you always focus on self-help work, right? If you always focus on self-help work, or if you wrote about sports, like you were talking about, right? And like, let's say you stopped caring about that and you didn't want to write about that anymore. Just because you built up your success that way doesn't mean you have to continue to do that. You can do it through other ways of like getting your success. You can, as long as you care about what you're doing, the success will follow.
Hmm. All right. I ran out of water, so I'm gonna refill my water bottle. Let's take a quick pause and
Okay.
we'll be right back.
Yeah, no worries.
So when you reflect on the poetry project and your blog and all the work that you do, when you look forward both at your last few years at high school and college and beyond, what do you think is like your vision going forward with the project?
So a lot of kids that they drop what they're doing after high school because they're like, all right, I got into Harvard, like I'm done. So I really think that like the projects that I'm involved with and the things that I've started, they're things that I really, really care about. And that's a piece of advice that I took from like a lot of people. As long as you do what you care about, like it'll always just continue and live on. So I really want to expand. Like, I want to actually register poetry as a nonprofit, and I want to take all those steps. But really, as a whole, my goal for the future is just pursue what I really like and pursue it in a way that's not just what society deems as respectable. So a lot of people who go into neuroscience, like, they'll just go straight into like they'll go become like a neurosurgeon. Like, I'm not into that. I don't want to be a doctor. I can't do blood. But I really want to kind of pursue it in a way that I enjoy and make sure that while I'm achieving those high levels of success and while I am, you know, getting to that high point of status, that I really stay true to myself and that I'm just the person that I want to be. Because it's honestly the titles, the awards, the accomplishments, they come, but that doesn't make you a better person. And that doesn't really, like, no matter how accomplished you are, if you don't love yourself and you're not in a place where you can really say, like, I'm proud of what I've done, you're not going to feel content with your life. Like I've won a lot of awards in my life, but like in the last 2 weeks, right? I won this research award. And right after I came home, I was like, all right, I have my trophy. I put it down on I put it down on my coffee table, and I went back to worrying about something, the same thing I've been worrying about for like the past 3 months. And if you don't work through like your problems and like the stuff you need to heal from, like if you don't take the time to heal, you're not going to be able to enjoy all of that. So I think just taking the time to heal, taking the time to kind of assess, like, okay, this is what I need to do in order to move forward and really just sit with myself. I want to do that. Like as a whole, it's not just about getting into the college. Like I have my dream colleges, I have a list, I have my dream jobs, I have all that. But honestly, to the core, I really just want to be content and fulfilled and happy and be like the most like beautiful version of myself. And that's just like my soul. Like I want to be content and just feel good about what I'm doing.
Have you always been that way?
Yeah. Like always, I've always been the person who's like when I started my blog, actually, I was in sixth grade. Like I was a young person, right? I'd always talk about like all these like big, concepts, like, okay, this is what you're gonna do to like, get this goal and achieve this. My teachers would always write to me, like they would come to my workshops and be like, how are you in seventh grade and talking about all this? How are you writing about all this? And I don't think that it's a particular age. Like, I don't think that it's just about, how old you are. I think it's really just about being dead set on like, this is what I want out of my life. And I've gotten distracted too. Like, honestly, like the past couple of months, I started thinking about this one thing and only worrying about this one thing. And like all my goals kind of became like a secondary to that. And recently, like this summer, I sat with myself. I'm like, if you only worry about that one thing and you don't detach, you just don't let it go, you're not going to get to the place where you need to be, right? So if honestly, like I've always been like that, like always kind of try to take the positive route. But when I get super negative and I get to kind of be very upset with what I'm doing, I always just go back to the principles of like, these are my values. I go back to my values and I start from the foundations. If I need to go back and learn, like relearn the things and my beliefs, and I really just need to reset, I'll do that. Because growth and healing, it's not just a linear process. You don't just go one step, two step, like you don't go like that. Sometimes you go back, right? Sometimes you go back to that negative thought form. So if you want to grow, you kind of have to take that step to say, all right, if I went back, let's see why I went back and let's start again. Right? If you go back into doing something that's negative and you break like the habit of being good and you go back to like an old habit, make sure that you can kind of reset and just start again.
Amazing. Samyuktha, thank you so much for taking the time to do this podcast. It's a pleasure speaking to you, learning about your experiences. Anything else you want to close with?
Really just always follow your passions and make sure anything that you do, you care about that. So yeah.
Amazing. All right. Thank you once again. We'll hopefully keep in touch.
Yeah. All right. Bye.
Have a good one. Thank you for tuning in to my episode. If you enjoyed that episode, I guarantee that you'll love this episode right here. The best way to support the channel is by hitting the subscribe button. It will help me to upgrade the channel, get better guests, better production, and overall more episodes for you. And by hitting the subscribe button, you'll ensure that you'll never miss a new release. While you're at it, hit the like button, leave a comment, and share the link with your best friend. Thank you once again for tuning in, and I look forward to seeing you in the next one.